in 1711 that is pushed open. It's broken. It happened a long time ago. Someone broke in there, and Tony covered it with the board, but it's not even fully covered. That also I hope to fix today, because also for people it's noisy. Because every time a car goes by, your mama's on the street. There isn't even a window, and it's freezing also because of it. So God willing, at least I have to fix the internet before I go back over there. I send a message to Shlomo and to Gabriel. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Tzadik Ches. We left off on Daf Tzadik Zayin Amid Beis in the beginning of the Gemara, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We're going to actually have today various ways that we will reconcile the Reisha, which is the case of a person who's koyre b'sefer on the iskufa, as we pointed out when we learned the Mishnah, with the sefer, which is the case of the gag. We're going to learn a few very interesting statements. One will be, for example, that a yid by the teva, whenever you pick up a sefer, you can't just pick up a sefer and put it down in another place. You pick up a sefer, the Gemara says, ayune ma'ayin bohu. You have to open it up and take a look inside of it. We're going to go back to Shitas ben Azai that we learned in Shabbos, that Mahalech Ka'omed, B'chlal, as we mentioned in the beginning of Perik HaMotzei Tefillin. This is a chapter, B'negeya Hoitsha'ah, as Tosfos pointed out. If not for a few details that brings in ERUVIN, the first one of which was Erev Tchumen, that we learned about on the first Mishnah, Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, this really is a Hoitsha'ah Shabbos de Kesugya. We will also be learning about, as we mentioned yesterday, that the Mishnah says that when you cannot take the sefer back in, turn it on its face. Turning it is a way of being mechabed. We mentioned that many times. We know with Pasha, the minig is when you leave your sefer, you never leave it open. It's disrespectful. But no one ever turns it upside down. We will see from our Gemara today, indeed, why we don't do so. When you have access to a beged or to something else that you can use to cover your sefer, that's a lot more honorable than turning a sefer on its face. But when you're out there in the Reshus HaRabim and you have no such other book, you have no other beged, there's nothing that you have to cover it, then a little bit is better than nothing. Then you are hoifech the sefer upside down, and that is more respectful than leaving it just open, the letters facing up. We're going to introduce him to a Mishnah, another detail that's Bechlal not mentioned too explicitly, and that is what were to happen if there is a koisel meshupa, if there is a sloping wall, and something is resting on a sloping wall within 10 tefachim of the ground. So is that considered resting or not? As this will relate to the case of a Mishnah. And on Daf Tzadik Ches Amud Beis, we're going to have 2 Mishnayos. One is going to be a case where you have a ziz, where you have some sort of ledge that's protruding under your window over the street. Question is whether you can take things from your house to put it on the ledge and take it back. Reshus HaYachid to a Reshus HaYachid that belongs to the same owner. What's the issue? As we'll see, the issue is that maybe something is going to fall to the street. It's a ledge, it's not a balcony. And then a person might come and bring it back when we do make Exeda, when we don't make Exeda, with many other details. And the second Mishnah we will learn in the Tzadik Ches Amud Beis will be Mahashgacha Pratzos. We are learning now Perik Echad L'Yoyim in the beginning of Touch and Pei Aleph, Hilchos Shabbos and Rambam, the dinim of a person who is standing in the Reshus HaYachid. Can he move an article in the Reshus HaRabim within Daladamas? Or if a person is standing in the Reshus HaRabim, can you move an article in the Reshus HaYachid with no restrictions? We're going to learn our Mishnah. We're going to actually see that there are 2 girsa'os in our Mishnah, because really this is a machlokes Tanoim and a lot more. So Chavra, we left off on Daf Tzadik Zayin Amud Beis, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. In the beginning of the Gemara, the case of the Reish of the Mishnah was when you're standing, you're reading a sefer on a iskufa, and then we're going to have the case of the sefer of the Mishnah of a person, same thing, reading in a sefer on the gag. Asks the Gemara, "Hi ho iskufa, this threshold hechidami, ilema that the iskufa is a Reshus HaYachid, like we mentioned when we learned the Mishnah, because the iskufa is 10 tvachim high, and it's 4 by 4 wide, and v'kama Reshus HaRabim, and it's right in front of the Reshus HaRabim, because when the Mishnah says that v'nizgalgal hasefer miyadoi, the Mishnah did not explicitly say where did it fall, not all of it, but some of it. Let's learn the way we learned the Mishnah, that in front of the iskufa is a Reshus HaRabim. So the part of the sefer that fell out of your hand fell on a Reshus HaRabim. And the Mishnah is telling you in the Reisha, there's no shitas. Everyone is saying you can roll it back. The reason why one might have thought that one should not be allowed to roll it back, and indeed, if not for you holding to a sefer, no one is allowed, if I'm holding a non-holy article, even if some of it is in my hand, which means that even though Midai Raisa did not come to a Hanach yet, which means that bringing it back doesn't really create an Akira, which means Midai Raisa, I'm doing nothing wrong, but Midai Rabbanan, there is a problem, is because if Chazal would always allow me to bring it back because it didn't come fully to rest, sometimes it will. In our case, if you are the one that are holding on to part of it, sometimes you'll let go of it, Dilman Nafel, or sometimes it will fall out of your hand, and you'll quickly bring it back, and that's going to be an Isur Doiraisa. So normally you make Exeda, Elama here, the Chiddush of the Reishi is here, we do not. And why do we not? Because we're speaking about a Sefer Kodesh. We're not speaking about only a Sefer Torah, we're speaking about any Sefer, but there's Kedusha there, Dav Tzadik Ches. And if that would be the Pshat and the Reisha, well, very nice, that fits Bidiyuk with the third opinion in the Mishnah, what appears to be the third opinion. We're going to see so much clarification in this Mishnah. Just one heads up that in the case of the Gag, we don't have three Shittas. It's very important. In the case of the Gag, I'm saying this now because the Gemara is already alluding to it. There isn't what appears to be above 10, under 10. Then it sounds like Rabbi Yehuda says, no, if it's Kimaloi Machat, if it's just, the thickness of a needle above the ground, it's one din. If it's on the ground, it's another din. And then Abshimin, really in the Gag, there's only two Shittas. Rabbi Yehuda and Abshimin, a lot more in Amid Beis. So if that's the case, then the Reisha of the Mishnah is following Shita of Rabbi Shimon. The Amar, as we learned at the end of the Mishnah, the Amar called over Shumi Shum Shvus, Einoi Oimed Bifnei Kisvi HaKodesh, even though it's on the ground itself. And therefore you may roll the scroll back in, right? And we're not afraid, right? We're not afraid that if it's going to fall out of your hand, you'll do the same. We're hoping that no, that if it's going to fully fall out of your hand, then you will know that you're not allowed to bring it back in. And again, here, third line from the top of the Amid, the Gemara is already alluding, we're not even quoting the first Shita of Lamai Lamasara, Lamata Masara, because that's not, we'll see, that is all part of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, if it's removed from the ground, you know how much? The thickness of a needle. Then and only then goyloloi etzloi, which means that if it's actually laying on the ground, then you may not be goyloloi to yourself. It's only Rav Shimon that says afilu ba'aretz atzma goyloloi etzloi. So what? Kum tachois reisha v'sefer Rabbi Shimon mitziyasa Rabbi Yehuda, which is certainly not ideal. And we're going to have a few approaches in learning the Mishnah. Approach number one is from Rav Yehuda. Amar Rav Yehuda in. That's the only way to learn the Mishnah. Reisha v'sefer Rab Shimon, Mitziyasa is the Tana Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, Rabbah rejects that.
Rabbi, isn't there an obvious question at this point, which is like, if the Reisha is Rab Shimon and the Sefer is Rab Shimon, forget about the fact that it's got Rabbi Yehuda in between. It seems like it's saying the same thing.
Okay. Yes. These are, many times the Gemara could have said that, but you'll see from the Sugya the way Ravina and Ravashi put it together. Correct. In other words, there's going to have to be a beard lit Rabbi Yehuda. Why did the Mishnah give two cases? Let's keep on learning. We'll see a lot over here. Rabbi Omar, first of all, I'm going to be moide that it's not about whether the iskufa is a rishus hayachid or whether the iskufa is not a rishus hayachid, which is of great significance. Not about that. But there are times, we just learned a few daf ago, tzidei rishus harabim. Tzidei rishus harabim, we learned the Mishnah of Rabbi Eliezer. Remember, the wall fell, and now people are walking on the place of the wall. What happens? I'm not speaking about dinei reshuyas. I'm speaking about kavod of sfarim. If people de facto, they walk on your threshold, your house is built so adjacent, so close up to the rishus harabim, that whenever there's a lot of traffic, people de facto, they walk on your threshold. And that's the case of our Mishnah. Here we already understand, Danny, why we're speaking about Oi Skufa. That Hachabi Skufa hanidresses askina. People step on it. It becomes the path of. Now, 1 second. I'm not saying that since it becomes the path of, it loses its status of a Rishus HaYachid. We're not saying that. That's the question of Tzidei Rishus HaRabim. Independent of that, forget about how you define the Rishus of the Iskufa. We're speaking about a holy Sefer that's on the ground. It's on the ground in a place that we know that people will trample upon it. Umishum bizoyin kisvei kodesh. Not Reb Shimon. Reb Yehuda, let's go to Reb Yehuda. Reb Yehuda holds that if it's on the ground from the gag on the area in the Reshus Harabim, you may not roll it back. Midrabanan. Even Reb Yehuda's moida that if it's on a place where everyone is trampling upon, there's a bigger, there's going to be a bizayin. People are going to step on it. So here, Sharu Rabbanan. Very good. Rabbanan means Reb Yehuda. Make that clear again, because there isn't even a real Tanakama in the Sefer of the Mishnah, even though it sounds like that, as we'll see soon in the Gemara. So that's the second approach.
But Rabbi, can you just clarify, according to Rabbah, what is this iskufa? It's a reshus ha what?
Reshus hayachid, making that clear. It's 10
tefachim high?
Yes, 10 tefachim high.
Yet people trample on it?
Yes, it can happen.
Were they giants?
10 tefachim is 30. 10 tefachim is let's say 35 inches, and if it's punkt in front of it, a Reshus Harabim that gets very busy, there's no room.
So the part that gets trampled on is the Reshus Harabim, not the iskufa.
No, the part that people jump up on the iskufa to walk on it.
Okay, but in that case, rolling back the sefer and then leaving it on the.
No, you're taking it back in. In other words, the iskufa is a Reshus hayachid. You can go from the iskufa back into the house.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
Now, here's the problem. Problem is that like Kedar Kebakodesh, Rebbe is Mekatzer, and you have Baraisas that we're finding that elaborate the case of the Mishnah. We know Abaya is quoting a Baraisa that elaborates the case of the Reisha. This Baraisa is about the Iskufa. But there's another nuance that if it's Toich Daladamis, even though the Reisha allows you to be goylel back, even if it's on the Iskufa on the ground. But here we add a nuance. If it's taka within 4 amas of you, then goylel yatzloi. But if it rolls dalid, then you have no option. Now, the E says the Gemara, the E amrat be Iskufa, the Bach adds the letter hey, right? Hanidres is askinon, mali toich dalid, mali chutz la'arba amas. What difference does it make? In other words, we're saying that if it fully falls from your hand, I'm sorry, Danny. Let me make something clear by Skufa. Danny, I want to clarify something. It fell under the Reshus Harabim. You're standing in the iskufa. Okay, very guys. If you won't be allowed to roll it back, then you'll have to leave it where it is. It's going to be trampled upon. Very good.
Is it Carmelit?
No. It doesn't. The iskufa is still a Reshus hayachid. It fell under the Reshus Harabim. We don't want for you to have to leave it where it is. It's going to be trampled upon. So therefore, what difference does it make if it's beyond daladamas or within daladamas? Let's not forget that since you are still holding on to it, you're not violating anything when you roll it back. It's the Chachamim were afraid that it might fall down. It might fall off out of your hand and roll fully into the Reshus Harabim. So, I know that in the Reshus Harabim itself, you can't carry more than Daladamas. I know that. But again, in our case, it's still in your hand. So if we are afraid that people are going to trample on it, and therefore we waive the Rabbanans, it should make no difference. So there has to be another understanding which will give light, which will explain why Lamay Nafkemina Toich Dalit or Chutz La'arba Amas. So Ella Amar Abaye, the third explanation, Hache Biskufa Karmelis Askinen. The skufas are karmelis. How would that be? Pashut. It's 4x4 or more, but it's not 10 tefachim above the ground. It's not within 3 tefachim. Within 3 tefachim, but have a dinner of a Reshus Harabim. It's a karmelis. Now, the Reshus Harabim meveres lefan now. Now we'll understand. Here, now we'll explain the skufa that if there's a potential for you to violate an Isur Doiraisa, then Chazal will not allow you to bring it back in. Whenever there isn't a potential for a violation of an Isur Doiraisa, there is a potential for an Isur Darabanan. So we're not going to be Goyzer Exeda. Now it's Gavaldik. Toich Daled, if it's within Daladamis, which means that even if it falls out of your hand, the Inafel, because you won't be carrying it, not Dalad Amas, B'Reshus Harabim, Also, carrying it from a Reshus Harabim to a Karmelis is also not an Isur D'Oraisa. So now that it's not even an Isur D'Rabbanan, don't forget it's still partially in your hand. So now Sharolei Rabbanan. Chutz la'arba amas. Chutz la'arba amas means ich bin moide that mi Reshus Harabim to a Karmelis is no Isur D'Oraisa. But if it rolled Dalad Amas B'Reshus Harabim, then if it will fall out of your hand and all of it will roll 4 Amas away from you, for you to bring it back, you're going to be transporting it Dalad Amas B'Reshus Harabim. Now you're violating an Isur D'Oraisa. The Imaisale also the Yachatas here Gavaldik Loi Sharu Le Rabbanan, and now we understand the Hemshech of the Mishnah. What will be the Hemshech of the Mishnah? Now the Mishnah speaks about a Gag. By a Gag, regardless how close it is, you will always be over on an Isur D'Oraisa if it falls out of your hand. Because if it falls out of your hand, then you're going to bring it back. You're going to bring it Reshus Harabim, Reshus Hayachid, which is a Gag. That's why all of the Tanaim and the Mishnah Taka say that if it's above the ground and the Chiddush of Rab Shimon, even if it falls on the ground. But in other words, the Reisha is Rabbi Yehuda. Whenever there's a potential Isur D'Oraisa, you may not bring it back. And that's dafka why we speak about an eskufa, because it's a karmelis. And that's why the Braisa adds the nuance, even if it's a karmelis, if it falls from your hand, you're bringing it Reshus Harabim only to a karmelis. If it fell, Dalad Amas B'Reshus Harabim, here also, potentially, you might be over on an Isur D'Oraisa.
Rabbi, can you just give I'm a little confused here because it seems like we have there's always two concepts in Haitzah. There's Reshus to Reshus, and there's Dalad Amas B'Reshus Harabim.
Yes.
It seems like this is somehow combining those two.
Yeah. But no,
you're on a Karmelis, right? You're on a Karmelis. Where does the Dalad Amas come into play here vis-a-vis Karmelis?
In the Reshus Harabim. First of all, Karmelis, we're speaking about a Karmelis that's not a Reshus Hayachid. We're not speaking about, let's say, a Karpav, Shalayhukaf Ledira, that really is a biblical Reshus Hayachid. We're speaking here about an area that's not 10 Tvachim above the ground. It's not a Reshus Hayachid. Which means that on a biblical level, carrying Reshus Harabim to the skufa, zero problem. You are on the Karmelis. If your sefer rolled 4, that's what the Braisa, 4 Amas in the Reshus Harabim, and that means that if the sefer will fall out of your hands and it's going to roll to the other end, then you bringing it back will be carrying it Dalad Amas B'Reshus Harabim. That is where the Braisa says you may not bring it back. But as long as it is B'Toich Dalad Amas, so even if it falls out of your hand, what will you be doing it? You'll only be carrying it from a Reshus Harabim back into a Karmelis, which to begin with is only an Isur D'Rabbanan. Here, you don't even have that. It didn't even fall out of your hand. So saying that you're not allowed to do it because it fell on the ground is Mamash Gzeira L'Gzeira. And that is L'Shitas Rebbe Yehuda. Masha Enkin Me'agag, Reshus Hayachid to a Reshus Harabim, if it hits the ground, Rabbi Yehuda says you can bring it back. Even though some of it is in your hand, because here, if it will fall out of your hand, you will be violating an Isur D'Oraisa. Let's move on. So now asks the Gemara, there's one issue here. I understand that you are standing on the Iskufa, but don't think, l'chayra, that you're going to end up on the Iskufa. You will bring it back inside the Reshus Hayachid. You might bring it back inside. Now, this has nothing to do with the sefer falling out of your hand. Don't forget that midrabanan, you may not go from a karmelis into a Reshus Hayachid. But if we are saying that the Mishnah is speaking about a scenario where you will never come to be over an Isur D'Oraisa, that's not true. I know that you are on the karmelis, but you're going to bring it into your house, into the Reshus Hayachid. Gewaldig. And v'chi teiman, if you're going to answer, no, even if you were to do that, it's not a problem. Because since there is a karmelis separating the street and your house, what's the worst case scenario? That you're going to take it from the Reshus Harabim into the karmelis, into the Reshus Hayachid. So the karmelis was mafsik, you never violated the akira v'hanacha, the Reshus Harabim, the Reshus Hayachid. Are you going to say that given the mafsekas karmelis leis lanban Isur D'Oraisa? That's not true. That's not true, because that's only true if you were to stop on the iskufa. But if it's gonna fall out of your hand, and you're gonna say, "Oh, this is not good. Let me bring it into the house," and you're gonna walk through the karmelis, but not stop there, even though you walked through the karmelis, if the akira was b'Reshus Harabim and the hanacha was b'Reshus Hayachid, yes, you violated an Isur D'Oraisa. Like Rava told us that hamayvir chayfetz mitchilas arba l'soif arba. We're speaking about carrying dalad amas b'Reshus Harabim. even if the ha'aviroi derech olav, you carried it higher than 10 tefachim off the ground, which means that you made a akira in the Rishus Harabim. You made a hanacha daled amas beyond in the Rishus Harabim. But if you lifted it up beyond 10 tefachim, which is normally what happens when you carry something because of the physical height of a person, then you carried it through a makom ptur. But that is inconsequential. We don't care if an article went through a domain in which in that domain there's no problem putting it down. We look at the makom akira and the makom hanacha. So if you were to pick it up in the Rishus Harabim, even if you walk through the Carmelis, if you don't stop there, and then you make a hanacha b'Rishus HaYachid, you will come to violate an Isur D'Oraisa. So there is always a potential in Isur D'Oraisa. Answers the Gemara, 2 answers. Number 1 is Hacha b'Mayaskina, and I'll tell you the Mishnah speaking about the Iskufa Arucha. It's a very elongated, it's a long Iskufa, and therefore Adohachi v'Hachi Mitkar. There's a limit. You're afraid. Maybe he's going to stop and make a hitzah. It has to be that if it's a little less skufa and it rolls out of your hand, then it makes sense for a person to say, oh, I'm reading this in the wrong place. You see, it fell into the Rishus Harabim, let me go in. But the person also knows that Shabbos. A person knows that midrabanan, you can't go from a karmelis into the house. Certainly, if you pick it up into the Rishus Harabim and you don't stop in the skufa, then you're over on the Isur D'Oraisa, people will remember that. Elama, if it's the little skufa, then before you remembered, you can violate. But if it's a long iskufa, Chazal say, by the time you want to bring it in the house, you're going to chop that know that you're not allowed to bring it into the house. But again, it's a doichik to speak about it's a long, and how do you define long? So the Iba, you're saying...
In general, Rabbi, he's on this Carmelis. He knows he's not allowed to bring the sefer into his house.
He knows that. I just spoke out, Danny, but that's only when the sefer doesn't fall from your hand. But think about Pashut human psychology. If something goes wrong, and it falls out of your hand, and it falls onto the Rishus Harabim, and you realize that you're reading it in a bad place. So then many times the person says, "Oy Gavalt, I don't belong here. Let me bring it into the house."
Yeah, but that's the place his sefer is kept for the whole Shabbos. Okay. He wasn't planning on taking it elsewhere. If it fell out of your hand, you might go in, and if it's a long iskufa, you're going to remember. But this is a Gavaldic logic. When you pick up a sefer, even if you were reading from it before, Ayid, you pick up a sefer, you look inside it. You will stop on the iskufa. You will stop there. The stam kisvei hakodesh ayune ma'ayin bohu. And when you're ma'ayin in the sefer, you can't read in the sefer and walk. Says the Gemara, okay, umanach, then you might put it down. But since we know you're going to stop on the iskufa, then you'll never come to violate an Isur D'Oraisa. So therefore, the first case in the Mishnah allows it to actually fall on the ground into the Rishus Harabim, as long as it is betoich daled ames, and you can pick it up. Says the Gemara, okay, people pick up a sefer, but who says they'll pick it up in the Carmelis? Maybe he'll pick it up into the Rishus Harabim. And then carrying it mid Rishus Harabim, l'Rishus HaYachid, even though you're walking through the iskufa, if you don't stop, that's an Isur D'Oraisa, v'leichush d'lama ayin b'hu b'Rishus Harabim. So here we have to say, our Mishnah follows Ben Azai, and Ben Azai says that if you are walking, not running, not throwing, walking, there's 1 foot on the ground, walking through a Carmelis by default will be a hanacha. Will be, and if you remember, so according to Ben Azai, if I'm walking b'Rishus Harabim carrying something, according to Ben Azai, you will never be over an Isur D'Oraisa. The whole concept of daled amas b'Rishus Harabim l'Ben Azai is only when you throw something, and maybe if you run, because there's no real hanacha. Says the Gemara of his Dilma Zarik Lu Mizrak, but still, even l'Ben Azai, throwing is avada not kosher. You might throw it from the Rishus Harabim inside the house. You'll be ma'ayin in it, and then you'll throw it inside the house. The Amar Rabbi Yechanan Moed Ben Azai b'Zodik, that even though it's flying through a different domain, that I don't care. It's not being munach over there. So Amar Rabba Barahav Zoy Meres. Another rule that no one throws Sifrei Kodesh because you're not allowed to throw Sifrei Kodesh. Ein mazrikin kisvei hakodesh. So therefore, again, we're just saying that the case of the Reisha of the Mishnah is one
in which even if it were to fully fall from your hand, you won't be even on an Isur Doiraisa if you bring it back. That's why we are lenient. And the case of the Gag, which is a new case, is that Gag is Avada Reshus HaYachid. That's where we have Taked Rab Shimon is lenient, but Rabbi Yehuda is Machmir. Right? So one of the dinim the Mishnah said is that all you need to do is whenever you cannot pick it up, so you have to leave it there, but you turn it upside down. Is that something that is acceptable? The Hatanya we learned in a brayso that koisvei sfarim tefillin umezuzos. So you're always your writer, you're a sefer, you're in front of it, and you have to go out to the restroom. You go out. That's not the machavadik way. Cover it. Use a garment, right? Like I mentioned, many people use a sefer. But covering is a lot better than turning it over. The Gemara says you're right. Covering is better than turning it over. But turning it over is better than nothing. So over there in the Braisa, Efsher, you have a beged. You have something that you can use to cover it. Our Mishnah, it's fell into the Reshus HaRabim. What do you have over there? Nothing. Lo Yefsher. You don't have a beged. And therefore, we don't say either do it perfect or do nothing. Right? Perfect is the enemy of good. So at least turn it over. Now, the Hoifchei Alaksav, if you remember, again, going back to the Mishnah, the first case was that if it's Mishihigia Lasara Tvachim, that means it didn't land. It's not like, it sounds like Rabbi Yehuda's only mashu above the ground. It's within 10 Tvachim of the ground, but it's dangling, it's called in English. So how can you turn it upside down? You're turning it on what? It's blowing in the wind. For how long? So now Rava begins. Therefore, it must be that our Mishnah is speaking about B'Koisel Meshupa. That will already shed so much light. Okay, you are here on the Gag. The wall that goes into the street doesn't go down straight. It goes down angled. It goes down sloped. So now it's a taka on the wall. And you can taka turn it upside down. Now it doesn't make sense. You bring it back. Nela, if we understand that it's taka not touching the ground. So Rabbi Yehuda is saying, I don't care about 10 tfachim, it's not touching the ground. But if we're speaking about a sloping wall, you're kidding me? It's laying, it's resting. So the Gemara says, yeah, good. Now we're getting to Amir. Last line in the there aren't three shittas in the Mishnah. There's only Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon. If it's a kaisel meshupa, that's the rule. It's by the Reshus HaRabim. When you're going up 10 tfachim, you are within the Reshus HaRabim. It rested on the wall. No one allows it to go this shiur of machat. Lamayla masor or lamata masor. However, avol daf tzadik.
Rabbi, can you just clarify this question here about the sloping wall? That therefore it's like it's lying on the ground. Why is it on the ground? It's on the wall. The wall is fully
The avir Reshus HaRabim goes up 10 tfachim, and there is a bona fide hanoche. It's resting. It's on the wall.
On the wall is like it's resting.
Sure. Of course. Elama b'koisel she'ena meshupa. That now we're adding. If b'koisel she'ena meshupa, which is a normal wall, a perpendicular wall, a wall that goes straight down. So then l'mayla mishloisha. Now we have a new din. So if it's not resting, but let's not forget about the groisa lavut. So it goes l'mayla mishloisha, lamata mishloisha. L'mayla mishloisha, including shloisha goylo yatzloi, because it's not resting. If it's lamata mishloisha, right, then hoifchei alaksav. Because it's already considered resting, we're not done yet. Rabbi Yehuda, right? Only the pin thickness. We still may roll back, but again, the Gemara says why? Because Rabbi Yehuda holds the be'inan anachal gaba mashu, even though it's lamayla mishloisha, it has to rest on something. So the Gemara says, hold on, the Elyahu Amar, guys, we learned this on Shabbos Daf Pei. We learned this on Shabbos Daf Kuf. That Rava says that toich shloisha lirabanan, that Sarech Hanacha is now. Are you telling me that this is the Machlokes Tanoim over here? which will be a big doichik. It's going to come out over here that the Rabbi Yehuda holds that we don't say that toich shloisha is like resting. No. And that sugya was Kluta Kamishahun Kharashi reminds us of sugya. It's not negated the sugya there. We learned that concept that we already said that toich shloisha, you still need to have hanacha. Whenever a hanacha is needed, we don't use lavud. So now you're saying this is the machlokes tanaim. Ella, this is the final angle to understanding the Mishnah. The entire Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, the entire section of the Mishnah. In other words, the case of the Gag. That's also why in Amud Aleph, in the beginning of what we learned today, the Gemara didn't say Reisha, Rab Shimon, Seifa, Rabbanon, Rab Yehuda, and then Rab Shimon. We didn't say that. Or Mitziyasa, Rabbanon, and Rab Yehuda. It's only Rab Shimon and Rab Yehuda. The whole Mishnah is Rab Yehuda. Kula Rab Yehuda, V'chsure, Mechsere, V'chiktani. Bemet Varam Amurim, that what? Above 10, below 10, because on the shupa. In other words, once it's resting on a wall, you may not take it back. It's a normal perpendicular wall that's going completely vertical. Then guys, you can bring it back because why is that? Because my tama, because they were inon, right? Hanacha al gabamashu, which is exactly what the Rava said over there in Masechta Shabbos, Daf Tei and Daf Kuf. It's whenever a hanacha is needed, whenever you need a hanacha, we don't use lavud. We use lavud for many other things, not for this, not for Yisah. Hanacha means hanacha. Yumaldik. Now, another nuance. Even here, lavud helps. Why even here lavud helps? Because if you remember, we learned this in the beginning of Masechta Shabbos. A akira has to be mimakim dalid. Remember that? That's the whole chiddush of a yad. A yad is like dalit tvachim. A hanoch has to be al gabe makim dalit. But if it's on something that's toich shloisha tvachim off the ground, then we say, since it's lavud, it's as if it's resting on the ground, and you have the minimum hanocha on something solid. Dalit tvachim and dalit tvachim. But it has to rest on something, on mashu. That's an important nuance. In other words, we do still apply lavud, but l'kula alma, it has to be on, that's Rabbi Yehuda. And that's l'kula alma. Just Rabbi Yehuda is the one that articulated the shita, that if it's dangling in the air, you can still bring it back. Okay, chavra, 2 more mishnayos. Let's go. Says the Mishnah, Ziz shalifnei achaloim. We're learning about a ledge that's jutting out from the exterior wall of the house, right below the window. And it's very advantageous for you to be able to, it's like a shelf. Put something on it, take something back in. And says the Gemara, Noitan Olav. Indeed, you can put things on it. If something was already there, Noitan Olav on Shabbos. The question is, what's the chiddush? You own the house, you own the ziz, especially if the ziz is 10 tvachim above the ground, right? Whether it's 4x4 or shusayachid, whether it's a makim ptur, what's the issue? Hi, ziz the mapik lehecha. Where is this placed? So ilema the mapik lidashus arabim means over. No, you don't need the picture yet. If it's over the rishus arabim, then the Gemara is asking a gavaldik question. By now we should already be familiar the way Chazal make takanas and gezeres. I'll tell you the problem. It's not a balcony. It's a ziz. It's not a secure area. Why are we not afraid, as we just had in the previous Mishnah, Dilman Nafil Va'asili Yisuye, that the item that you put on the ziz will fall down. If it's over the Rishus Harabim, it's going to fall into the Rishus Harabim, and then you bringing it back is violating an Isur Dairais. Elot must be that it's over at Rishus Hayachid. No much, it's over a Chatzir. So then Pshita. So Amar Abaya Lo'olam the Mapik Rishus Harabim Umay Noistan Olam Diktani. Now we have to really limit the Mishnah. What may you put there? What may you bring back from there? Only Kalim Hanishvarim, breakable Kalim. What would be the Gzeira? It might fall into the Rishus Harabim. If it's a Keli that if it falls into the Rishus Harabim, it's going to break. There'll be nothing to bring back. Then Taka, we don't make a Gzeira. And there's a Chiddush, we don't say Loi Plug. We differentiate between Kalim and Ishvarim. Now, Kalim and Ishvarim, just to be aware, in the times of Chazal, most Kalim were made out of earthenware. Earthenware was very cheap. Earthenware breaks. Glass was much more expensive. But Kalim, it's either glassware or earthenware Kalim. And indeed, now this is a Chiddush, the Mishnah doesn't even allude to it. Tanya Nami Hachi.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
If the ziz is a Rishus HaYachid, even if it's hanging over Rishus HaYachid, aren't you moving from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid?
Very good, Zvika. If both owners, if it's under the same ownership, then there's no issue. And that will be the case. It's your private house. It's your ziz. It's your ziz. No, it's from my Rishus HaYachid to my Rishus HaYachid. There's no issue, not even midrabanan, not even.
Or if there's an Erev Chatzeris, that would be fine too, right?
Not negain, no. Fine, say that. But it's under your window. It's coming out of your house.
So sorry again. So what's the pshita then? It is pshita. Meaning, what's the question then?
The chiddush is that I'll tell you more. It's not only not pshita. We're coming with a big chiddush. We're saying that you may not put over there your a sefer. You may not put a sefer there, because a ziz. Think about the word.
Or a metal vessel you can't put there. Something made of
metal vessel, a sefer, anything that if it's going to fall down, it will not break. If it's over at Rishus HaRabim, the Chazal make a gzeira, don't use it, because something might fall and you might come and bring it back from the Rishus HaRabim back in your house. Tanya Nami Hachi Zish Lifnei Achaloin Hayotzei Li Rishus HaRabim, which means over the Rishus HaRabim. So here the Bryce is more detailed. Nice than olive, not anything. Otherwise, plates, guys, kalim then were earthenware kalim. They break, not ours. They were inferior compared to our kalim. Uvekoisais, cups, also kleicheres. Kitoiniyos, pitchers, tzeloichiyos, flasks. And now the Beraisa continues. You may make use with the entire koisel. Rashi says not only in the ledge under the window, but even if the ledge runs across the entire length of the wall. So explains Rashi. Tosfos says that mishtamish b'chol koisel is b'chlal not a ledge, holes in the wall. Only if it's above 10 tfachim of the Rishus HaRabim. Ad asora atachtoinim. Remember, guys, something that's within 10 tfachim above the Rishus HaRabim has a din of a Rishus HaRabim. Then you may not take something from your Rishus HaYachid, putting it on there. You're putting it in Rishus HaYachid, the Rishus HaRabim. Now the Beraisa gives another detail. If there is another ledge, Kevan, where's the picture? Under the first one, the one underneath protrudes more. Mishtamesh boy, the bottom one you can use. No, that's not the picture. The bottom one you can use like a given, again, a given only for things that won't break, only for things that will break. But but on the top ones, you have one over the other. You can look at my hands. They're only what's adjacent the window. What Bachlal are we talking about? What does that refer to? Explains the Gemara. If it's not even 4, we're speaking about the depth, then Makim Pturu. And therefore, Vafilu Keneged Chaloinoi Lo Yishtamesh. Why not? Makim Ptur. So the Gemara is introducing another concept, and that is that if something is so narrow, what's the whole fear? What's the whole chiddush of the Gemara? That things might fall. If something is not even daled by daled, it for sure is going to fall. If it's going to fall, it's going to break. You're not going to bring it back. I don't care. You're taking something from a Rishus HaYachid. You're putting it on a ledge that's so narrow that it's going to fall into the Rishus HaRabim. You know what it looks like? It looks like you took something from the Rishus HaYachid and you put it into the Rishus HaRabim, which you may not do. I know that was not your kavanah, but we're speaking about this practicality of things falling off the ziz. So if it's not even 4, you should not be allowed to use even the makim that's under your windowsill. The E is bay arba'ah. Then b'kolei hakoisel l'shtamesh. Not only this is that's the top one under your windowsill. So I'm gonna buy you like this in the latter case of the Beraisa. Tachtoin the isbei arba'ah, and therefore you can take from your window and put it on the lower one. The chiddush of the Beraisa is the top one. The top ziz, guys, doesn't have the depth of 4, but it was laid on the same level of your windowsill, and the depth of the windowsill with the ledge now has arba'ah. It also goes out to the sides. So that's the word. The Elyon lace lay arba'ah.
Depth meaning going into your house? That's what you mean?
Your house, going over the Rishus HaRabim. Yeah, going from your house over the Rishus HaRabim. Mashli masay ledalid. It's when you apply the windowsill, which is aligned with the ledge, now you have 4. So therefore, now it makes sense. Because we say the it's part of the ledge of the window. And yes, we're learning a new thing over here. Don't put something on a ledge that the probability is very high that it's going to fall into the Reshus HaRabim. Even something that's breakable. Even something that if it's going to fall, you're not going to retrieve back. But you're making a hitzah mit Reshus HaYachid with Reshus HaRabim. Don't put it there. But since, and what's called big or small, you need to have a depth of 4 tfachim. So therefore, whatever is aligned with the windowsill, and now you have with the windowsill fall is good. But the high geese is also okay. Chavra starting the new Mishnah. Gavaldik says the Mishnah. If your feet, if you remember in the beginning of Shabbos, after many daf, we began to appreciate the beauty of a hand. Like, what is a hand? We learned on one hand that if the first Mishnah, if you place something on my hand, you made a hanacha because I'm standing on the floor. But that's only if my hand and my feet are in the same reshus. Let's go to this Mishnah. If you're standing in the reshus hayachid and you extend your hands out and you pick something up in the reshus harabim, now I know you can't carry it more than daladamas, but can you carry it at all? Why not? Because maybe the moment you picked it up, it's already like in the reshus hayachid. We don't say that, at least not this Tana. If your hand is not in the same domain as your feet, we just look at your hand. And therefore, and likewise in the reverse, if you are standing in the Reshus HaRabim, you may be metaltal b'Reshus HaYachid. By the way, here, you're not even limited to daladamas, because b'Reshus HaYachid, you can go from one end of the house to the other end of the house. Ubilvad. Obviously, this line goes on the Reisha. This line goes on the first case of this Mishnah. That when you are oimid b'Reshus HaYachid and you are being metaltal b'Reshus HaRabim, I get it that the Mishnah is telling you that we don't consider your hand in the place of your feet. Say that, but no one can be metaltal daladamas b'Reshus HaRabim. The chiddush is you can be metaltal toich arba amas.
Rabbi, metaltal means like you can actually bring it into a Reshus HaYachid?
No, God forbid. No, move it in that domain. Very good. Well, the Rebbe speaks about this whole din, that we are oimdim b'Reshus HaRabim. That's us. We're living physical beings in this world. And like the Maggid of Midrash says, that Hashem Silcha was everything that we do is moving things around in the Reshus HaYachid. Everything that happens in the holier worlds depend on the avodah of a yid here b'Reshus HaRabim. Now, you may not stand in the Reshus HaYachid, v'yashtin, and urinate into the Reshus HaRabim. Wow. That's called a akira b'Reshus HaYachid, anach b'Reshus HaRabim. Or, same thing in the reverse, b'Reshus HaRabim, we don't need that, we're weiter, we're moved on weiter. B'Reshus HaRabim, v'yashtin b'Reshus HaYachid. Or, v'chein lo yaroik, you may not spit. Now, if you do so, guys, you are chayiv chatos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, another chumrah. Af mishenipla shroikei befiv. If the saliva is collected in your mouth, here also says Rabbi Yehuda lo yahalach arba amis ad sheyaroik, because even though it's in your mouth, it's not considered part of your body if it's gathered. Not the way normally saliva is just in your mouth, but it's considered bottled to your mouth. Now, says the Gemara, let's at least begin. Again, a teacher teaching Chia Barav in front of the father Rav. When he learned this Mishnah, he had a different gear. So it's not a problem because what we learned in the Mishnah is really subject to a machloikes tanoim that will have a naf kuf aleph. Not the way we read the Mishnah that yes, oimed adam b'Reshus HaYachid metaltal b'Reshus HaRabim. No, he read the Mishnah that lo yamed adam b'Reshus HaYachid metaltal b'Reshus HaRabim. I just want to make it clear. This shita is not holding that your hand follows your feet. No one says that. Midoiraisa. We are saying that we are afraid midrabanan. Makes a lot of sense that if you're standing in one domain, even though your hand now is in the other domain, all you need to do to be chayiv is to bring it to yourself. So the Chazal were afraid that you're going to bring it to where you're standing, and therefore you may not do it, and you may not do it midrabanan. Bringing it in is chayv chatos. You may not make any tiltol midrabanan. No, he learned our Mishnah following that other Tana. So Amar Lei, this L'chayda Rav is telling the teacher of his son, Shavakt Rabbanon v'avadid k'Rav Meir, because as we'll see on Daf Kuf Aleph, the loy yamoid is shitas Rabbi Meir. And so he's telling him, listen, what you're saying is not wrong, but are you telling me that if you have two girsas, normally you would have the girsa following the das Rabbim, not the das Yachid? So that's tzaddik test. So answers or explains the Gemara that the reason why Rab Chinana Bar Shalemia accepted the girsa of Lo Yamad Adam, we're going to learn now the way Rashi learns, who savar me the Sefer Rabbi Meir Reish Nabi Rabbi Meir. On Daf Kuf Aleph Amid Beis, on Daf Kuf Aleph Amid Aleph, where we have this machlokes, the first sheet on the Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. There, the Rabbeinu HaKadosh writes explicitly Divrei Rabbi Meir. So there is an interruption between our Mishnah and the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Aleph, Amud Aleph. We have on Daf Tzadik Tes, Amud Aleph, we have a Mishnah. On Tzadik Tes, Amud Beis, we have two Mishnayos in Oigevalt. So you have many Mishnayos interrupting ours and that, which is why Tosfos argues with Rashi. But Rashi says that he learned that since when the Mishnah is discussing this case on Daf Kuf Aleph, Rabbeinu HaKadosh quotes first the Shita of Rabbi Meir, so therefore our Mishnah, even though it's a stam, should be following Shitas Rabbi Meir. So Reishanami Rabbi Meir. It's an unusual application of a Reish. Again, it's three Mishnayos and back. However, the Gemara counters, fine, that is just explaining Rav Chinana Bar Shalemia. But v'loyi, Takan Daf Kuf Aleph, the first sheet is Rabbi Meir, but no, Rabbeinu HaKadosh was making a Stam Mishnah, would not quote Shitas Rav Meir. We don't paskin like him. Not only that, our Mishnah is following the sheet of the Rabbanan, and therefore the right girsa in our Mishnah is, the way we read it, that yes, which is Shitas Chachamim. Oimed Adam b'Reshus HaYachid Matalde b'Reshus HaRabbim. Now Tosfos says Gavaldik. Tosfos says that he doesn't like we mentioned. Look inside the top Tosfos on the Tzadik Tes. Perish v'kontra Sefer goes, and he's quoting the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Aleph. The Mishnah on Daf Kuf Aleph begins with the words Lo Yiftach, Lo Yiftach. The Eidabad of Meir, the Ksas Kasha, says Tosfos. The Hira Choyke Yoiser Midai. To say that this is called, therefore, that dividend of Meir should indicate who the Tan of our Mishnah is. The Sefer, the Lo Yashtim, the Lo Yoroik. It goes to our Mishnah. Who is the one, right, the Polygalei? Who is the Memra being quoted? Rabbi Yehuda. And that's the rule. The Stam Bar Pluta, the Rabbi Yehuda is Rav Meir. So at the beginning of the Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is brought in later. So the Tanakama is the one who argues with Rabbi Yehuda. That was Rab Shalemya's thinking. Whenever you hear Rabbi Yehuda and there's another opinion quoted in the Mishnah, that by default is going to be Shitas Rabbi Meir, who is the Bar Pluta of Rabbi Yehuda. Chevra, God willing, to be continued. All right.
Shkoyach. Rabbi, can you just explain that Rabbi Yehuda? I don't see anywhere in our Mishnah where it's referencing Rabbi Yehuda. Are we talking about Rabbi Yehuda, the prior Mishnah?
Rabbi Yehuda is arguing with the Tanakama, and he's saying something that the Tanakama does not hold of. Rabbi Yehuda says that even if saliva is gathered in your mouth, you have to spit it out, which implies that the Tana before him doesn't hold to that by the saliva. So, and that is according to that's by default. That's Rabbi Meir.
Got it. Okay.